This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, we'll be talking about the decline of reading in America. I'm going to be speaking with Marcus D. M.D. Taylor. He wrote an article about this on his website, and the conversation will begin in a moment. M.D. Taylor is my guest. He wrote an article on his website about the decline of reading, and I thought it was well thought out. And we're going to talk about some of the things that he wrote about. Before we get into that, though, I want to do what I usually do, give my guests a few minutes to introduce themselves, who they are, what they do, what they think, etc., etc. So, MD, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Could you give a little background about who you are and why you wrote the article?
Thank you, Dan, for having me. My name is Marcus M.B. Taylor, go by M.D., and I am originally from Memphis, Tennessee. I currently reside in the upper North Dallas area. I've been in Texas since 1998. I've actually just retired from the military, from the Army, after 23 years, where I served all over the world, and also served the National Guard, Reserve, and also active component. I currently work for University of North Texas. University of North Texas Health, Fort Worth. We just went through a name change. We used to be called UNTHSC, but we now call University of North Texas Health, Fort Worth. I'm also a PhD student at the University of North Texas, and I'm studying my PhD in learning technologies. And my area of focus is AI literacy, to make sure that we understand how AI is used and how we can use the breadth of it to create ourselves an opportunity to learn and also not lose cognition while doing so. So that's where I am, and I am a avid blogger. I write a lot, and this is somewhat a newer phenomenon for me. For the last, I think, 5 years, I got into reading, writing, and the first year I got into reading when I was away from my home, and I ended up reading about 75 books in 1 year. You know, small books, and I moved myself to a bit larger books, and also got into the area of audio booking too, because I did a lot of driving. So that's where it got me into reading more and to get an opportunity to read. So I'm very happy to be here speaking to you about those things.
Just off the top of my head, my wife grew up, part of her growing up in the Plano area in Texas, right there. So are you anywhere near Plano?
That's about 30 minutes from me.
Oh, okay. Well, let's hit the ground running. Your article, which was on your own website, we'll get into some of the points that you list. As a writer myself, someone who's written poetry, prose, essays, plays, novels, short stories, whatever, I think when you talk about the decline in reading, you have to, I think, also talk about the writing that's being produced. Do you think, for example, when you wrote about reading, were you thinking in the cultural sense of reading great works of literature, whether it's ancient Shakespeare or the Greeks, or whether it's modern stuff, or were you more concerned about just basic literacy?
It kind of goes to both of those, because one, and for someone to know what great literacy is, they must understand how to write and read that information. And so what that does, it comes down to the basic level of, are we reading enough so we can identify what is real information, what is good information, what is great writing. But if we don't read enough, we don't know the difference in it, because we can be bamboozled from thinking one thing because it's framed one way. And then if we don't read enough, it gives us an opportunity to not distinguish good writing from just writing.
For people who have done what they call creative writing, there was a big change. If you look back into the 19th century to the early 20th century, most of the people whose names you could recognize as writers, like a Walt Whitman or a Mark Twain or a Jack London, were writers who wrote for presses. They wrote for the mass media, and then on the side they would somehow write a book, might get famous, and so forth. Then after World War II, that seemed to change with the rise of MFAs, Masters in Fine Arts writing programs, and they sort of took what I call the Henry Ford model of building a production line for cars, and tried to do that for writing. And I always say it's sort of like, take a 6-week course and you too can be Emily Dickinson. And it seems
Right.
to me that not only is that not the way that human creativity, especially in writing, works, but it's also a very cynical thing that I think was designed simply to gull people into paying for these courses that had no real world chance of improving their odds of being better writers. Yes, you might make some connections that could get your book of short stories published, but uh, what would you say if you what is your opinion on the way that writers have for the last 70, 80 years since World War II been put into this sort of factory like production line?
I think writing became more of a commodity. That's what happens. So when writing became a commodity for publishers, they want to get more information. The more books they can put out there, the more money they can make off of it. So the commodity of writing kind of helped make that an issue for the classical writers. On the other hand, we went to more of a technology boost after that as well. We got to radio, we got eventually television, and so to curb that information, schools started, when schools started getting more modernized, they wanted maybe made their own libraries at school. They put information out there, and then it became more of a just regular book writing to read from classics. How writing's done, where you can understand a plethora of information. It became a commoditized process to just control thought, control information. So if you want to speak on this new technology or this new thought process, you get a lot of people write a lot of books about it, and eventually people will believe what it is. Saturation.
Before we get to your article, you raised the point about artificial intelligence, and in the last year or two, especially, we're getting, whether or not we're in an AI bubble, I don't know, but we're getting this idea that AI can do everything, and to me, it seems almost sort of quasi-religious the way believers believe in it. But if you look at AI writing, I would contend that writing has gone downhill on a daily basis, whether we're talking people who are publishing books or whether we're talking people just writing business letters, or and I again go back to the MFAs and college, this idea of a production line. So it seems a little bit to me false to blame AI for the lack of a writing ability. I do think, though, that artificial intelligence, if it takes hold in the way some people are predicting, that you are going to have a higher illiteracy rate in the not in numeracy, the ability to write, because look at what the internet did just even 20 years ago with LOL and all of these acronyms that
Yeah,
you're like,
memes.
you got 10 letters. What the hell does it mean?
Right. You're talking about the emojis. I think there's two things, and right now, and I'm studying this portion right now, and I'm writing books on this currently, is we have a very very lacking understanding of what AI literacy is. Right now, it's a new thing. It's like the dot-com bubble. It is a dot-com bubble right now. Eventually, something's going to go and pop it where reality comes in. We don't know where or how or what it's going to be. But right now, there's a very corporatized, like I said, commoditized version of AI that is scary to them when it comes to developing minds. But then there's also a new marketing plan to get people to buy into things by using AI, by having time. So I think reading and writing itself can be hurt if there is no forward-thinking process of how to align the newest technology, the emerging technology, with our traditional way of learning, or at least the traditional aspect of how we write and how we read things and how we interpret it. But right now, because we're in such a emerging technology time and era, uh, the the decline of critical thinking is what is going to be the issue we're having, because everyone wants to get everything done now, faster, and not put a lot of emphasis on understanding what they read, which goes towards our misinformation and misinterpretation of things. Because, like you said before, we're putting emojis. as narratives. And if one culture does not understand that, or one generation or two generations don't understand that, there's a disconnect in communication with each generation. So writing is very important, and understanding what they're writing is very important. But right now, we have, I'll say right now, 4 to almost 5 generations of people here on Earth, and we have, the last two, they have their own, you know, speech. So it's kind of difficult to talk to about it. I say one good example is the word disrespect. From the newer generation, the literal version of the word disrespect that most of us understand has a causation, right? But in a newer era, it's basically attached to disagreement or perception. If you don't like what I like, and I'm just going to call it disrespect, when there is no action of the disrespect based on literary understanding of what we see, and that's just how different words are now. We use different words. Well, the newer generation use different words that don't mean the actual meaning, and that's been historically used. So that's one area that shows that they don't even understand the origin of words to be used, and that shows that they're not reading enough to understand what these words they're using convey in their everyday language.
Yeah, it's the fluidity of a word's meaning is quicker and more ephemeral than it ever was. I mean, I'm 60 years old, so if I go back to the late 60s, early 70s, a word like groovy, seems ancient now. But people, they cycle through, like we said, these emoji type words with sentences or clauses even with just words. And 3 years from now, is anyone going to even know what that means? From their generation. I wanted to start with the first point you make in your article, where you talk about reading is in decline worldwide, and you mentioned in there reading for pleasure, and I'm wondering if part of that is because we have so much more. If you go back 120 years, around the turn of the 20th century, we we had books. I think we might have just been beginning to get 33 records. We didn't have radio. We didn't have TV. We did have the telegraph. We did have the telephone. We certainly didn't have the internet. And now people have, the internet games that have become ubiquitous. I go back. I go no farther than Pong with computer games. But it seems to me that there's so much more, and you can only do so much. So I think in a certain sense you can see a contraction of the reading audience, but you would think that would make the reading audience more literate, better, wanting better stuff. That seems to be a more worrisome thing than everyone just reading for pleasure. What would you say there for your first point?
Well, we're so overstimulated now. With technology, we're so overstimulated, and we have all these digital reading opportunities, which I think is great for modern version of how we read, how we comprehend or even engage in reading. But the question is, because we're so stimulated, we're not as focused on finding meaning and comprehension in our words and what we read, and we get bored pretty quickly if we're not overstimulated or stimulated at all from the first few words in the book. So what the thing is, it's more interesting to look at a meme. A meme can tell you a lot more because it has a picture to it, or it has a music to it, or it's placed in a place in a frame that speaks to truth, but it's not. So it gives us an opportunity to make it difficult to discern from information that's proper to disinformation or misinformation. So we have actually put ourselves in situations where we're overconsumed. We have a passive understanding of how and why we should read, and the pleasure side of it is not there anymore.
Let me draw a comparison with television, because to a lot of people, television, they will say it's a golden age or whatnot. I'm the exact opposite, and the reason I say that I don't think television is in a golden age, and I'll make this analogy to writing and reading, is that if you look back to the 1970s, we had ABC, NBC, CBS. We didn't even have Fox. We didn't have the little netlets. We didn't have cable TV, other than maybe a local college might have its own little cable outlet. and you would have great shows. You'd have the All in the Families. You'd have the Jeffersons. You'd have the Mary Tyler Moores. You'd have all of these shows that still have a cultural relevance. But what happened is back then, 50 some years ago, there was maybe what 170 million people in this country. Now it's double. Now, though, if you look, I mean, I don't even have cable, but I just go on my smart TV and I can get this, that, and the other thing. And it's like there's literally 100 times more outlets with all the population only doubling. So you're only getting 1/50th of the quality because the talent level, we didn't suddenly go 100-fold people, they're not 100-fold more people ready to make great television than there were 50 years ago. So everything is sort of this thinned out gruel. And I would argue that I think one of the things too with Reading for Pleasure is you are getting a lot of these writers, as I said, from the MFA market. They've got their degree and they're going to get their sci-fi book or their whatever genre book published, and they're not particularly good writers. And so what happens is the reader comes along, and instead of reading a great novel about by some of the names I mentioned earlier, you're going to have them reading, about, I got a vaginal wart and how this made me feel less a woman or something, and this turns people off. I think much in the same way that some of the the gratuitous stuff on cable television, the Dexters and the Sopranos and this, and every kind of sociopath is somehow becomes a hero. This kind of stuff turns people off. So do you think that when you talk about in your second portion there about schools and deep reading, do you think that it's because there is just so much out there that that it has thinned out the level and people don't have the discernment?
I can say that I can agree with the discernment portion, but the writings, for the school portion, the writings are adapting to the audience that they really want. I mean, the book. If you look at the book sales and the bestsellers, they're striking an emotional chord, or systemic chord, or something. Whatever they're doing or writing, or the books that they're marketing to the public may have a certain genre to it that actually goes along with what we're actually having in our society. So I think our books these days are only just a reflection of what society wants us to talk about. If there's social issues, then they want to have social books. If there's a motivational issue, they want emotional books. They don't want the intellectual is not being marketed. So the emotional attachments to social growth or social areas are the areas that they want to, as marketers. And so now we go to the school side of it, right? So same thing in our school. Our school is now going to a standardized testing process. So I remember we would go to school, not saying compared to how we was better than before we do it now, but in my opinion, anecdotally, when I was in school, I had a book report to do every 6 weeks, right? And then all over the summer, we had book reports to do. And even our corporate entities like Pizza Hut was reward children with reading so many books. So I wanted to read, I wanted all the pizza I wanted, right? Because I would benefit from it. That is going away, right? Even though that program is, I think some corporate entities still have that program, but for the most part, it's not being pushed because we have a standardized test process that takes away the student's opportunity or enforcement in school or encouragement in school to read a lot more books, and now we have an issue with our social area of books being banned in school. So now the issue is not more about reading in books anymore. It's about the context and the content of the books rather than who's reading it. So I think we're in an area where we have socially lost the opportunity to put emphasis on reading for comprehension, reading for understanding, and reading that helps us have critical thinking.
About a decade ago, I worked as a custodian in a Texas high school, and it was in between jobs. And I remember in the evenings as I would be cleaning up in the classrooms and whatnot, I was astonished to see that there weren't book reports. You had a book. You're reading Little Women, let's say, by Louisa May Alcott, and you were required to write 2 paragraphs, draw a picture of something from the book, or a character or a scene or whatnot, and then at the bottom you had to give it like in either from A plus to F your grading. And I'm thinking, like, is this what you're talking about when you're talking about deep reading? That if you're having children read a book, and let's say it's an acknowledged classic, you're not even requiring them to write, say, 500 or 800 or 1,000 words about what they thought worked or didn't work about the book. All you are doing is saying, here, 2 paragraphs, and make a drawing.
Hmm. So, I don't know the science of why they do that, but I do know when my kids were in school. All right, especially my oldest son was in school. He read all the time, and so when we had conversations, he he had a critical and a deep thought about what he read, and he would automatically attribute that thought to what he sees in life. And so when he brought the literal version to the social version, to the reality, he started to have more critical thinking about things and people rather than just reacting off something that he was assigned to do just for a small amount of time. So basically, when he read and had to do a deep analysis of what he read, it gave him opportunity to expand on that and keep some information he learned in his mind while going through other distracting things and other like sports and band and so on and so forth. But he understood it and he kept with him. When we actually watered down our education system to check a box and say that he read, but is there real retention information about that? What do they get from the books they read? What are they getting from the source of information? How they disagree? And that's another thing. There's some things where students have to learn to know how to disagree. You may not like the book. You may not agree with the person in the book. Can you actually convey that information, critically thinking, as well as emotionally respond to a book that you don't like in an appropriate manner? We don't have those things anymore. Those outlets are more, I don't like it, I'm not going to do it. And then what happens is the parents come in and say, I don't like the book either, and why should they be reading it? And so I'm not going to get to the social aspect of what books are and what their contents are. That's with the students and the parents. But the whole thing is, are we reading enough to learn how to see things from a different aspect of our lives that we may not have access to? And are we understanding how to live our lives? And are we learning how to see things from the eyes of someone else in their experience or through writing and reading?
But would it also be fair to say that if you have 10 children and 3 of the kids are really good readers, 3 are bad readers, and 4 are in the middle, that if we're constantly focusing on just getting the children, the 3 children who are the least readers, getting them up to snuff, that you're also sort of not giving enough attention to the really good readers. I mean, years ago, my parents were old. They had if you were really good in class, you would be bumped up a grade or 2 so that you could be with your higher peers. We don't do that anymore, and that seems to be more just to support a demotic thing that everyone is equal. But clearly, people aren't equal. There are going to be people who are naturally gifted in music, and they should read, the Mark Twains or the Dostoevskys or whatever if they're in high school. But if they are gifted in a particular area, let's focus a little bit more on the gifted kids because those are the ones that you really can't afford to tamp down because they're going to be the leaders of society, in 20 years. Is that part of what you're talking about when you speak of deep reading and the need for critical thought?
Well, similar, but not completely,
Okay.
because those who may be very good in 4 subjects may be very poor in 6 subjects. They may not have very good social skills. They may not have good literal skills. They can read, but can they actually speak to what they read? So I think our litmus tests on those are very complex. And not being a psychologist or sociologist or those type areas, I couldn't speak to that aspect. But as far as the cognition side of it, I think that we have a cognition in learning and development that's very prevalent to the specific subject they're in. Because, like I said, you may be very great at writing, reading, and understanding, but may not be very good in the sciences, or very good in the sciences, but not really understanding how the math works. So when you have a combination, those combination children, those are the ones to take a special interest in and figure out what are they doing compared to the others. And there are many other areas that actually are affected, socioeconomic, are they in the area? So if someone actually has no access to public health, public libraries, or access to tutoring, or I mean, so there's so many different things that we have. I come from Memphis, Tennessee, in the Orange Mound community, which is a low income area, high crime area, and I had libraries, I had access to it and everything. My problem was because I had access to the library, right, and I'm a high performing student, but I didn't want to go to the library because I might get shot. So the access was there,
Yeah.
but the environment made it a little difficult to go where I wanted to go and do what I wanted to do. And so it may seem from the outside, if I took a standardized test that I didn't measure up, it's not the fact that I didn't measure up, it's just those subjects and those areas, I wasn't, built very much in those areas. Now, once I learned them, I learned understanding, but once again, I wasn't taught to actually pass a test. I was taught to understand what I know, and that's the same thing with these other kids. So if someone is a higher level kid or gifted intelligent kid, like my wife was and my kids were, and if they had the other infrastructure that helped and encouraged them to be more, then yes, we can put them on a trajectory. But it's not necessarily going to be leaders. They could be very good in their professions. They could be the experts in their fields. But we know today most of our leaders, in our fields and the CEOs are middle area students. There were C students and maybe B students. And so they hire the A students and the geniuses to do the job to help them get better. So it doesn't make them an actual leader, I would say, but they may lead in their field and their understanding.
Yeah, and that's a good point that gets to the whole idea of when people talk about equal opportunity. You can have all the talent if you want, but if you're not given a fair chance, or like they used to say about, what was it, George W. Bush, he was born on third base and thought he hit a triple. But one of the things when you talk about how reading affects critical thinking, you list three major points: developing analytical skills, enhancing empathy and cultural understanding, and improving attention spans and cognitive endurance. I want to take the third one first, though, because that seems to be referencing things like what they call neurodivergence, ADHD, kids with that would have been 100 years ago, probably sent off to some orphanage or something to learn how to read or whatnot. But so you argue then that deep reading not only is good for pleasurable activities, but deep reading also could help the cognitively impaired?
Yes. And I didn't use any stats that we did at our study very deep into that, but yes, it is shown that we have cognitive. The more we actually spend time dissecting information that's written, even if it's a novel, it's a comic book, if it's anything we are not so stimulated on our visual aspect, written words creates opportunity for us to think more. And also, when you're reading a book and you're really into it, your attention span draws into what you're looking at. You look at a television, once it goes commercial or once there's a change in scenery, you can just I'm tired, I'm looking at them right now. But when you're actually into a book, sometimes it takes you forever to even stop reading the book because it's so into it. But cognitive endurance is something that's scientifically been studied for years and years and years, and we're learning more and more about how focus can actually create a better cognitive understanding because you're not distracted by doing different things. So if I'm cutting my grass and I see a rabbit, I may just stop and, what is the rabbit doing there? What is it doing? And now I'm looking at the tree and I see squirrels, and the thing is, I'm supposed to be cutting the grass. So in reading books, it keeps it basically especially how books are lined out, where they're going by line, you're literally just going and do it, and you're paying attention to what you're looking at, reading, and creating a world in your mind, or even understanding. Even if it's a nonfiction book, you can associate things that you do know and associate that information to, oh, I know this information, so it adds our cognition because I'm reading something that I may be understanding or can relate to my life, or it's something that's very, fantastic, and I want to indulge myself into that world of fantasy or fiction. So I think it's a very very ambitious thing to continue to read because it keeps you focused on the matter that you're on.
The second part is enhanced empathy and cultural understanding. So this would be that if, let's say, you're reading a book. I mentioned, for example, Little Women, but I'm sure there's more contemporary books that get into the mind of a female. But let's say, for example, you're a lily white kid living in Boise, Idaho. You've never seen a Hispanic person. You've never seen a black person. You've never seen a Chinese person, but the school wants you to read and write a report on Ellison's Invisible Man.
Mm-hmm.
And here you have this white kid. He reads this. If he has the ability to read well, and if he has been educated well to read deeply, he will understand a bit more outside of his own purview, a bit more about other cultures, and that Ellison's writing in this particular case would help him have a greater empathy for people who are different from him. Because if you look at bigotry, one of the things that bigots have in common is they have no empathy. They don't understand things beyond their own limited purview. So is that what you're referencing in that point?
I think in those examples, it depends a lot on the context of the book, and because there are a lot of books that are actually one sided. That only sees its point of view, so it's very similar to them not being exposed to anything or exposed to hate only.
Mm.
I think especially with a young mind, when they're reading books, they need to have a mentor, a guide to help them through the books, to have a conversation. I think books like those should increase or encourage productive conversations, so that person can have a different context. Because just say, for example, use your example, some kid, white kid from an affluent area or from a rural area, and they read the autobiography of Malcolm X, right? Without the proper context and the proper guidance in reading it, it may make that person feel like they did something wrong, right? That particular person during that time in the 2000s are feeling they did something wrong based on information after the 1960s, right? But if someone kind of showed them, this is what happened, this is what he was saying, the kid doesn't have to, change themselves up based on the narrative, right? Or they can read something from Alice Walker with The Color Purple, right? And in that area right there, you'll see a depiction of how it was in the 1930s with African American community in a rural area, right? You can see socioeconomic differences in that movie. You can see the sexism in that movie. You can see how women were treated in that movie. Now that can give a kid an opportunity to see, well, back in those days with the right context, women didn't have the proper rights, but then they also had certain skills that gave them more rights based on Sugar Avery's, character compared to, Celie. And so what that does is gives the reader an understanding of there is a different world out there that people live differently, and it should, and with the right context and the right community and the right support, they can read more on different cultures and learn more. So when they don't have access to those things, as well as a good mentor or guide on reading, they only stick to things they know. And so when they interact with someone in real life, they really are either confused or indoctrinated into a type of thought process. And I see that right now with the African American community right now. The books they read, the books the books that are spoke on, the books that are actually pushed in a certain community is based on one type of mentality, right? White folks are bad, and this is why. And they'll have hundreds of books. So if you put a kid in that same scenario that reads only these books, then they're going to be culturally desensitized, even though they're reading. Same thing with somebody reading Mein Kampf and other ones, all right? They're going to be desensitized based on what they're reading. So I think that is a very complex portion, but it all comes down to how the youth are reading and who they can help conceptualize what was being read.
But it's not just a person from a particular ethnic group reading about their own ethnic group. I would argue that it's just as important for, again, that white kid who's never laid an eye on anyone who wasn't white, reading, say, Jean Toomer's Cane, a neglected book from the 1920s, the Harlem Renaissance. That will give that person, again, a greater emphasis. When we're talking about deep reading, we're not only just talking about parsing the text in a deep manner, but we're also talking about being brought. All of this literature, if it's really good, makes the world deeper. It sort of pulls you in like a surround sound at a movie theater, that you understand. Not only the let's say if it was a book about World War II, not only that you understand the political aspects of it, but you understand how that war affected millions and millions of people, both who died and didn't die. And so the depth that we're talking about is pulling you into a greater knowledge of existence.
Yes, I agree. My daughter's favorite genre, I mean, very favorite era to read on and research and just read and know of was actually World War II era. And here she is, 20 years old. So you don't see people who are 20 years old a lot who are not into history as a main source, but she enjoyed that era, and it was transformative for her because she lived. She was born in 2004. So for her to look for something in the 30s and the 40s and on up and really taking a liking to it, because it showed the transition of how our country and our world was even developed to where we are now, was very intriguing to her. But it also showed a reality that transformation requires sometimes heinous things to happen. And so that itself gave her a realistic aspect of the world of it's not all perfect and it's going to take some time to do things. And it kind of helps shape how she sees the world, and not in a negative way, but more in a prepared, understanding. Everything's not black and white type mentality.
So you also talk about low literacy correlating with misinformation susceptibility, and that describes this era of American history that we're living through now, probably even more than anything else, because we not only have political misinformation, we have scientific misinformation, people who still literally claim that the earth is flat. You have misinformation about celebrities, you have misinformation about business, black is white, white is black, up is down, down is purple, so deep reading then, you would argue, then also helps. I've always said great art, reading or writing or otherwise, great art helps clarify the mind and helps you approach things in a more rational and more direct manner. Is that basically what your take is regarding that statement about misinformation susceptibility?
Yes. And so, because once again, I go back to the beginning, my point at the beginning is information is not commoditized. It's a commodity, right? So if someone can make money off of this, they don't care about, it doesn't seem that they care about the reaction or the consequences of the information, as long as information has an audience. As long as information has an audience, it's going to continue to go there, and it's going to create a low literacy rate of understanding what they're reading, and also understanding how to decipher information that seems sketchy or not fallible, not credible to what reality is. A good example of was the National Enquirer, right? National Enquirer wrote a lot of crazy, weird, different things that many people could deduce that to what it was and tell, hey, this is not true, it's not fallible, it's not factual, it's not plausible. And they wrote it, and people read it because they paid for it, and now that place has money. And even that process is now have attached to our mainstream writing as well. You have the New York Post, you have the Washington Post, the New York Times, you have the Chicago Tribune, some of our largest, most, LA Times, news outlets that create, journalism and papers. They're intertwining, entertainment. They're entwining, false narratives, scary tactics, because they know that corporate people who want to bank on that will give them more money for it. So now we have commoditized words and verbiage it's difficult for someone to read something and actually have any facts, because now we're telling people you got to read this and then read this and then cross-reference this and cross-reference with this to make sure you have a complete picture. Well, we're in a lazy society. They don't want to go from here to here to here. If I can look at a meme, or I look at a Facebook post, I look at a TikTok on Instagram, or and make my own decisions based on those that actually have the same narrative, and then I'm gonna go read something that actually enforces what I said. So now we have confirmation bias. So it's a lot, and it's very difficult that we are writing. And I think writing itself is going to be writing. I think the quality of writing is going down. I think the commoditization of writing makes it difficult for us to have correct information, and it leads to disinformation and misinformation.
MD, you were just mentioning the inability of people to discern things, and you also talk about the rise of misinformation and fake news and how people skim without reading. I worked a long time in retail, and you see this playing out all the time, where like someone will buy something, and we're supposed to have these labels that say what's in it, and it'll say you have a big tub of ice cream, and it'll say 90 calories per serving. How many servings? 25 servings. So someone just sees the 95 and they think, oh, this is healthy ice cream and whatnot. And then a month later, they haven't lost any weight. So I think some of the same things go beyond advertising, in that we're just given these headlines. And I think I've read studies where people have only read the headlines and maybe the first paragraph, and anything after that, it doesn't matter what is said.
Yes, and that happened just last week. It happens often, but a good example of that was last week. I put with my fraternity members, I created a story for them to look at about hazing, right? And not say they were hazing, but just saying that, to put the information out there, because it's kind of like there was a young man in Louisiana that actually died from a hazing event, and I wanted to speak on those things because of the effect of our organization. And I had several people text and call me to be very upset at my title. And I said, well, did you read the entire article? They said, no, I didn't, but I got my opinion about it. I said, how can you have an opinion about something you have not read about it? Yeah. Well, this is exactly what he told me. One of the guys told me, well, the title tells me everything I need to know. I said, that's not how it works. Yeah. I made that title to grab your attention. I wanted that title to evoke emotion, so you do click on it so you can read. But instead, you evoke the emotion to get to the surface area, and you made a decision off something that was surface without going deeper into it. And a lot of times, with the quick marketing tools that are used, or same the idea, I used a emotionally evoking title to grab their attention, but the laziness or the not wanting to read it, because maybe reading is not something they practice on a normal basis. And I think when a catchy title seems to give you all the answers you want, that's what they go off of. Yeah. And so you see that a lot, especially when it comes to government documents. We get information like that, and the government documents are there. Someone would go and make a whole TikTok or a whole 40-minute version on what they think from the first paragraph of a 1,500-page document or bill. And they can say exactly what it is, and it's misinformation. So I think we're looking at titles, trying to figure out the entire conversation without going deeper into it, because we're not invested into learning what it is. We're invested into emotional complexity and emotional attachment to the actual title that actually puts their own mind into, I guess, a way to imagine what they're thinking is reality.
So you also talk about political and corporate manipulation, and I guess that, for me, would touch upon the idea that corporations just want bad readers. They want mindless zombies that will look at stuff and not actually have what it is penetrate them, whether we're talking fake news or again, the manipulations of advertising. Is that what you were touching upon in that moment?
Yes. Yeah, on that area. I do that with family members, co-workers. I don't try to get too political in my work and everything, but when I'm in my trusted circles or my relaxed circles, we have those conversations, and a lot of times I may not know what their political stance or what they're upset about, and I don't want you to side in the conversation. I'll just ask a bunch of questions, and just asking questions evokes more emotional responses. And so I'll say, well, let me take a look at this and see what it is. And if I look at a bill or look at an executive order and I read it completely, because once again, I read a lot and I comprehend a lot, and I can also question myself on what does this mean to me of the bigger picture. Well, I find out that 90% of the time, I don't know 100%, but 100% of the time, they do not understand what's inside the document or the narrative that's put out there. And then you look at how media, once again, uses commoditized information to make money off of it. It's now that the corporate and political thing of manipulation is, it's not about the truth, it's about what we want you to know. And that's a very dangerous thing, because if the if a program or a social aspect comes in and it's aired and it's put in people's faces all the time, they will believe what they see, because they're not going to go out and do much research, or the information is so vast, like 1,500 pages for a bill. I mean, no one's really going to read that from a novice aspect,
Yeah.
and they have to make decisions and vote for the people to do that. But they have, this platform that's out there, but 1,500 pages for one bill?
Yeah.
People not read that.
Well, I mean, with Trump's big budget bill of a few weeks ago, I mean, literally, even the Republicans said they didn't read it, and I voted for that. I mean, come on.
Right, and so even the people. I mean, from the Patriot Act to all the other things we have, and our congressmen say they have not read this. That just shows you a caption of what our country and our society and our culture is now, that we want to have the highlights. We really want the the short and skinny of everything. We want the cliff notes of everything. And matter of fact, we want less than cliff notes. We want bullet points on massive information, because reading that much gives us cognitive dissonance and cognitive overload. And so we don't have the patience to read those things. We want someone to give us the bare bones and summary. And that's where AI comes in now, right? So people gravitate to AI because now they don't have to read a book anymore. They just put the information in, and I want a summary of To Kill a Mockingbird. Well, it'll give you a great summary, right? That you can actually speak to it. But do you understand all the complexities of that story? And during the time it was, no.
Well, you know how just 5-10 years ago, Wikipedia was rightly vilified for having so much misinformation. But now AI is taking things from not only Wikipedia, but other wiki sites, which, I could say that I consider myself an expert in writing or whatnot, but I don't know anything about how to build a starship. Someone Googling, it's just so ridiculous that AI, what is it, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. Any system, computing system is only going to be good as the information it has. And if you have, for example, to use your example, the Kill a Mockingbird book, if you have some bad analysis that the AI is drawing upon, you're just reinforcing the bad analysis of this work of art.
I think when it comes to AI, there's one thing that there's an AI literacy area at that point. The garbage in, garbage out is a good reference point for many things out there, but I think Google and search engines are more prone to garbage in, garbage out than AI, because AI does not comb the internet for things, except for something like Perplexity that's actually made to do that. They have learning models that actually create that. So the misconception is they're making the information from the net. They're really not. They're creating it from learning models, from bits of information that it knows. So basically, it's like information that they get is not necessarily from a particular website. It's just bits of information where it comes together in algorithms and kind of have a forward, a critical, statistical analysis on information, and it doesn't make any when the models are not created in a biased manner, which is hard to figure out. So, and many times, but it's not good information for the internet to do that. But it can be a problem if we have information that's put into through our models. So, We talk about that a lot in the efficacy of AI, and right now until we have some mainstream or political and governmental regulation that actually can make a difference, we're going to continue to have these conversations, and there's going to be a lot of low trust into the AI world, except those who understand it, which is even complex for us.
Well, for example, didn't Elon Musk recently retweet Grok because it was giving out answers that didn't agree with Musk's own political positions on this, that, or the
Hmm.
other thing? I mean, so there
Yeah.
are going to also be bad actors in that, and that's only going to perpetuate things because I don't know. I'm asking
Yeah,
you, Chris.
you're right, right. In that aspect, that's why regulation has to be, we have to have some of our top minds in the field, not just a lot of, I wouldn't say, to just say, let's get a bunch of, a team of machine learners and data analysis and data scientists, and they're going to make this fix. No, no, no. We need a full spectrum of a team and task force of different disciplines that actually go towards how we can make this better, because you need someone that's an HR thought process. You need someone that's a engineering thought process, someone who actually understands learning technology and instructional design and curriculum design, those type of things, because it creates an idea based on known theories and frameworks that we use to actually have cognition in learning and development. So it must learn as well as we learn. So if we put in models that create learning opportunities, how the mind works rather than how a algorithm works, then we'll have less issues in it, in my opinion. And that'll give us opportunities so we can see a full spectrum of how we can do these things. A good point you said earlier about the information. Google had a problem not too long ago with images. They had to take the Google Gemini off the line. I think it was Bard at the time, but Gemini actually was actually only putting white individuals when you asked for a man or a woman. It was just a white woman, a white man, and so
Yeah.
it couldn't. In that model, it didn't differentiate that there were different cultures in there unless you asked it. And then some areas were so restrictive, you can ask for a young black child, a young Asian woman, and it will say, "I'm sorry, we can't do that," because they were so caught up in not trying to. I think the DEI portion was actually had negative prompts. Negative prompts is not a negative thing. Negative prompts saying, "Don't do this, don't do that," and so we had a problem with that area. So it couldn't represent the people that actually uses it.
But what wasn't that also part of a larger part of that a lot of large learning models, AIs, can't see certain depths. For example, for self-driving cars, for example, sometimes they would speed up because they couldn't. If you painted, if let's say you painted a road like in the old Roadrunner and Coyote cartoons going down the road, and you put that where a real road was, the AI couldn't recognize it. And similarly, with especially darker skinned people from Africa or elsewhere around the world, darker skinned than you are, AI for some reason wasn't programmed to be able to get the correct visual depth perception. For example, you can see I have a thin nose that points out like that. So there we are talking about the inherent biases of the programmers, presumably, who wouldn't even think to themselves, oh, it couldn't recognize darker skinned people because they have normalized the idea of a person being someone with paler skin.
Yeah, and that happened to Kodak as well. Back in the days, Kodak could not have. Kodak
Oh,
had
the
an
camera
issue.
company.
Yes, Maybelline had an issue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Band-Aid had an issue
Yeah.
because
Flesh
those
colored
entities, yeah,
band-aids.
those entities were built on a average.
Yeah.
And so when you look at an average of people in the world, you start based on what they call average. That is what happens. I think it's same very similar to there's a book called I think we the problem average, where it talks about how the Air Force were killing pilots a lot, or pilots were dying a lot because they used the average of people's sizes, but they were not looking at different hand sizes, legs length, head sizes, and they just built the cockpits for a 5'8" person of 170 pounds.
Yeah.
Well, if someone was 6 foot, or they were 5'7" or 5'8", were actually more had bigger arms, longer bigger hands, longer kneecaps. You couldn't with kneecaps, longer legs and big kneecaps. They didn't have the things to protect them as much because they only geared to a certain size. And then the same thing happens when we go to AI models and also other algorithms that we have created a average model that only speaks to a certain amount of information, and that information gets left out sometimes literally unintentionally. I won't say it was malicious, but when you have a bunch of programmers and they come from a certain part of the world or a certain part of the community, they're gonna mindlessly create based on that. That's why we have different hybrids out there called empathy maps. Yeah. So now part of business is empathy maps now, and that also comes from understanding, then reading information that actually goes towards new information, new technology.
So you have 3 recommendations to reverse the decline in reading. One is reinforcing reading in education. You write that you need to integrate explicit critical reading instruction into curricula. Can you just expand what that means?
So I think teachers and educators, community leaders, parents should ask more questions on what they've read, what their children read, right? Because, and also allow them to write freely, right? Because I think a lot of times we get caught, especially a younger writer, we get so caught up in the format. I know when I was going to get my master's degree, my bachelor's degree, and also now PhD, we focus so much on APA, MLA, Chicago style. Just let the kids write, and then we'll deal with the formatting next. But because they're working so much on the formatting, which usually a lower score that they're actually going to lower weight, but they want to focus more on the style of writing compared to just writing. And so you can't be as critical because you're now writing in these columns, these boxes, where you're trying to meet a standard without thinking that let me go ahead and put it out there and actually say what I gotta say. And also when it comes to how they read the curriculum, how is this affecting me? Because you're just telling me what to do, but how do I feel about this? What do I think about this, right? And also one thing they should do is, we should model. We always say teachers teach, right? I think community, parents, and also teachers and administrations should model the 2 different areas. How do I think, or what do I think, and how do I feel, right, about what I'm thinking about? We do a lot more now about, if you look at this, anecdotally I say, you listen to someone talk, they automatically say, this is how I feel, right? Yeah. And when you ask that question, how you feel, and you bring in, so what do you think, they respond with how I feel. So when I ask them, what do you think about the writing that you have, they go, how I feel. Okay, so that makes you think about it, and what areas of that writing that make you think about this, and then how did you feel about what you thought about. Those connections are not making, so it's all about emotional reading, right? I'm going to read because I'm emotionally attached to it.
Right. This is a big problem in criticism, whether it's popular movie criticism or it's deeper social criticism, is that people make the error of something being good, quality, equating with what they like. But you can easily dispose of that in saying that, if I'm a straight guy and I like a pretty woman, I may not have a lot in common with her. I can think she's pretty, but maybe she's a real, hell on wheels there, and I'm not going to like her that way. And in the other same reverse of that, there could be a woman I'm not particularly attracted to at the first time, but then 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, I've talked to her, and all of a sudden she's become beautiful because she's smart and intelligent and whatnot. So people get too hung up in that kind of thing. And I want to make one other point too, because I say this to a lot of writers. Art, creation, the act of creation artistically, has 2 parts: ideation and execution. What is your idea? You're going to paint something that's like Van Gogh. You're going to write a book like this person. You're going to try to write a character that does this. But the execution is the how you do it. And that's important, but it's not nearly as important as the ideation. You can have, if you have a great character and a great scenario and it plays out and it makes you think at the end of it, okay, so you use a couple of semicolons you didn't need to use. You can learn that afterwards. That's not the important thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. I fully agree. And then when I talk to the young kids now, when I do my workshops or when I have conversations with groups of teenagers, and I say, hey, don't don't just think about the end result of it. All right, stew in the thought process. What do you really want to see? Let's start with the back and then move ourselves forward. So it'll be backwards motion, backwards planning. This is the end result. So let's not focus too much on that. You already know what you want to do. Let's go back to the beginning of how do you want to get there, and what creative process you want to get there without any. Don't worry about the function, the formats. Don't worry about what medium is going to be in. Just do the idealization portion. What's the idea, and move from there. And I kind of seen that make that seamless along with AI, right? Because now I'm showing them the difference of how do you use the medium to get it out, and also the time frame you have. And people say, well, you shouldn't write books and use AI. Well, you shouldn't have AI write the book for you that you don't know what that you wrote, right? But you actually frame those things and step by step have that creativity. You can create a book and have AI help you and use AI as your editor, as your format creator, and then you can learn from doing it over and over again. So after a while, when you're actually putting your effort into doing those things, not pushing a button, click and go, yeah, I'm done. It takes same amount of hours and time because especially if you don't know how to write, right? You worry about the information you want and you allow it to help you structure it where it's standard practice how to do those things, and that comes with educators and environments that understand how to use critical thinking because critical thinking is one of the largest thing to use for AI usage to be successful. The shortcut version that everyone's putting out there that's been marketed as, hey, this saves you time. It can, but it also can save you. It also can hurt your credibility if you don't know how to use it, what to use it, and understand it's a tool. And so when it comes to writing and reading right now, if we're not reading what AI is creating for help us, then we're writing things that we don't read ourselves, but we expect someone else to read it. And that's the same thing with teachers. The same that goes along to teachers in the schools are banning AI, but guess what? The teachers and the administrators are creating the course content using AI. Mm-hmm. So it's like you want to ban it here, but then you allow it to be prevalent in your everyday work and how you grade papers and so on and so forth. So there's an ethical issue in that area right there.
Well, I think there is some genuine concern because human beings, let's face it, we are lazy creatures. We're evolutionary wired to be lazy, not to expend excess energy to do something. If I can kill a rabbit with a trap, that's better than me going out on a day-long hunt to kill a deer. Because if I go on to try to kill the deer, there could be a saber-toothed tiger that wants to make me its lunch.
Right.
So I understand that, but. So you also say promote a culture of deep reading, diverse reading materials accessible. Now, a lot of people on the right would look at that and say, oh, we're going to have books about lesbian mothers, or we're going to have books about, interracial marriage, or we're going to have books about, whatever it might be, people with mental learning disabilities or something. But that in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's how it's done. So what exactly, when you say diverse reading materials being accessible to children, what specifically are you talking about?
When I see about diverse, I mean different aspects. You kind of hit on some things about women's empowerment, LGBTQ. But the thing is, we got to understand the discernment of information that we're going. Is this going to be a gratuitous book about some young boy losing his virginity at 13 years old, yeah, to an older guy? Is that something that's going to help that young man in life? No, that's not necessarily. It's more fan fiction that's placed into a world that is commoditized information again. And I think that diverse just basically means different from you, different from your thought process, and it could be a young white guy, that actually is in West Virginia reading about life in California, right? It's a diverse culture. It's a different, complete culture. Yeah, because your skin color is similar, we have a different. That's a different cultural aspect. I think diversity should be seen as the word is itself, difference. You know, but we use the word diversity to say black, white. It's so weird we say black and white, but we don't say yellow or red. I don't understand that. It's faux pas say yellow and red, but it's okay to say black and white. I just think that we have put an emphasis on information that doesn't align with certain cultures, and certain cultures want to have control over the information they have. You give an example of the right, I also say the example of the left, or down the middle. So there are sides that want their particular information out there, but in a free society, in a free market, I think that anybody put anything out, but we must have discernment on what we read, especially what our children read, and the context of why they're reading and learning. If someone wants to have a kind of coming of age story about a young man that's learning his stuff and he's looking at LGBTQ or wanting to transition, I don't think that book should be banned, from bookstores, a free market. But when there's taxpayer involved, I think there should be a point where, hey, let's go ahead and patronize the bookstore rather than put it in the classroom. Because when you think about our children going to school, we want our kids to know about math? Do we want them to learn about reading, writing, arithmetic, science? Or do we want them to learn about social, a little bit of everything put in between? And that's where we are now, because we're so low in other areas in school because we put more social aspects in the school rather than looking at how we are reading critically and thinking critically and not being indoctrinated into whatever area you are based on whatever political atmosphere we're in. I think that all political aspects should be very cautious on what they advocate against and for the sake of the cognitive decline and the critical thinking of our children. I think most of those conversations are adult conversations, and those should be based with information that those adults should be reading and being more critical on what they have for what they want for their children and their community, and not let politicians decide what's going to be.
I was thinking as you were speaking there was a book in the 1960s written by a man named Evan S. Connell called Diary of a Rapist. And it's one of those things that's been banned basically because of the title. It's not a particularly good book. Connell did write some good books, Mr. and Mrs. Bridge books, those come to mind. But the book itself, it was like, this was like a nerdy guy trying to think what it's like to be a sociopath. Having grown up in a very Goodfellas type neighborhood, I found it a ludicrous book. But I would not argue to ban that. I think what we have to do is, when we come across things, and if a child says, I didn't think that Huckleberry Finn or pick a Hemingway book, The Old Man and the Sea was a good book. You have to let them be able to have that opinion, even if you think it's wrong, and ask them why. Have them explain why they think it's good, and you can have a debate, and you may just end up saying, okay, we're going to have to agree to disagree. But it seems that process is missing in the reading experience.
I think you have a little point, and I think when it comes to the narrative of where that book comes from and who's funded that book is probably the biggest question we have other than the actual book itself. I like to take an example of my newest book that I'm writing right now is called 48 Laws of Legacy Leadership, and it actually is an antithesis book off of 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Right? I like the Robert Greene book. It's very insightful. I just think personally it's manipulative. Right? But if I never read that book, I would not be able to understand and identify someone using those tactics against me.
Yeah.
So it's also even though I disagree with a lot of the things, and I have recognized and learned through the military and also through my sports and things, how to read those the information inside the book and the narrative that it is trying to speak to and power. It also shows me reading that book of what to identify, what to pay attention to. If someone's manipulating me, because I read that book, understood that book, I know how to react to it because I know I'm now being possibly manipulated because it's been drawn out very thick. That was a very thick book too. So I think that the fact is that books can make you see things outside of your own purview. But if you read certain things that you disagree with, it can also help you see a version of things outside of your own experiences. And if I were to read a book, that's contradiction to who I am, I would have to understand with critical thinking of why I'm reading this book, and what my question should be: what am I trying to get out of this book, other than do I just like it because I'm reading it? Some readings are very hard to go through because it challenges you idealization wise, it challenges you mentally, challenges you based on your culture, what you grew up in. But sometimes just reading someone's thought process that's different from yours, you may not agree or even adopt whatever that book says, but it gives you a viewpoint that you don't have, and now you can probably have a conversation or understand how to navigate situations like that. So, for example, that book, Rapist book, so I think you said of Rapist. Well, if a woman reads that book, she gets an idea of what someone may be thinking about being a rapist, and she may be in a situation where she's like, you know what, I read that book and they said this is what usually happens around late night. I may well not go there based on me having a little bit more information than I have. And not say that she must read the book and love it, but it may be a warning for her if she want to read that book, or him. So I think books, if we have critical thought process on why we engage in books, it starts off very elementary of what a book is, why we read it, rather than this is a book that I agree with and I'm going to read 100%. Then that's how we get indoctrinated. We have a thought process on why we read the book, what it is for, and what we get out of it.
So the final point that you have in your article, you talk about teaching media and information literacy, and you say governments and NGOs should support public campaigns promoting critical thinking and independent research skills. So we've talked now for about an hour and 20 minutes, and you could talk probably to another 100 people online, but how the hell do you get how do you actually make real what you just wrote there? I mean, how do you get governments or people in charge of education to enact these things that you would like to see?
I would think, I said government NGOs, they must support, but it must be led by grassroots. Grassroots must be the one to lead this. Parents must lead this. Community leaders must lead this, and not a political aspect, because politics and NGOs and also businesses, if it's a market if it can commoditize or market or advertise, and it's the overwhelming portion, I think people will go to that. But right now, we commoditize things that are divisive, right? Like, for a good example of what I'm talking about earlier, Pizza Hut had the thing where you read books that you get a prize. You get rewarded for it. I think we need to have more rewarded opportunities for those who read. We probably need to have more government grants of organizations and schools that actually advertise and push critical thinking and as well as book reading campaigns and essay competitions and those things. I think there should be more and larger scholarships from organizations that give a lot of credence to, a lot of acknowledgement to readers and critical and competitions. I think that we love sports, but just picture us having a sport type of mentality with reading. I remember when I was a kid, the spelling bee was the biggest thing. Even though I was an athlete, regular athlete, the spelling bee was the biggest thing, right? And it was just amazing to me when I got put out on the fourth round of the 10 rounds, and I watched how these other kids and their parents and how involved they were in their kid understanding. That just tells me that kid, that young man and young lady, was reading and learning and critical and knew what the word meant. If they didn't understand it, they understood it when someone gave it that word into a sentence or a structure, and that tells me they were reading, because that's what I was doing. I was reading. I would never know these complex words that I don't use on a normal basis without reading. I think if we put more emphasis on those type of events and give it a platform, we got sports channels, we got the National Geographic. Why don't we have a learning channel that actually puts it out there? Why don't we have those in TikTok and Instagram? We have to promote these things not from a government side. Government can be a support structure, but it must be ground rooted from our community. We want to actually have our kids do great things, and we have communities out there right now that's doing that. You have the Indian community that comes from India. You have African community comes from Africa. The Asian community, it is in Asia, but I lived in communities, and that is really the main thing they want to show that they want their kids to learn and understand what they're learning, learn their culture and keep their culture, but also understand other cultures. And Americans, we just don't do that. Our immigrants are, they're not, many immigrants are doing those things, and they're bringing their culture in because it's slightly different from American culture. We make it, we choose the negative sides of it and say, well, they're trying to take over. Well, I go to my schools in Frisco, and a lot of the valedictorians, salutatorians, and top 25 or top 10 students are actually of Asian origin, right? And that just says that community puts emphasis on education, not just going to school getting grades.
Um, Let me just, before I let you just have a minute or two to just talk about your future plans. That does bring to mind, though, the recent hullabaloo with the Trump administration and all of this thing against diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, because a lot of people outside of the Indian or the black community are going to look at this. Well, we need to have this education, and we need to talk about our culture. They will use that as or weaponize that, to use the term now, against some of the very things, it seems to me, that you're talking about. So you can have the right ideas, but is there, how do you politically get that? I mean, you can make all the deals with the Taco Bells or the Pizza Huts or whatnot to raise literacy, but it seems to me that you're going to have to really be shooting through the eye of a needle to get the larger culture at large to give a damn.
Right. I think the logical. My grandfather told me something years ago. He said it takes sometimes 2 to 3 generations to make a major change. And not to say we're doing the generation you are, but the generations are, they're not changing their thought process. Politically, financially, socially, commercially. And the thing is, it must start somewhere. And I think the first thing we do is there needs to be an understanding that it doesn't matter what side of the aisle we're on politically. I think that our politicians themselves, because of lobbyists and things, they're not really protecting us, as readers, as individuals, because they're streaming narratives that our government entities are the number one dividers of our country, of our people. They sign off on deals that hurt our literacy. They sign off on deals that sow the division. And then it doesn't matter, one side comes in, changes this, and everyone's, a lot of people are on this side, and another one comes and does this. And there's no bipartisan in our own politics, and they're creating things that people just can't read. It's just impossible for someone to have work a full-time day, be a father, mother, do these type of things, support their kids, probably educate themselves at nighttime, and sit back and read a 1,500-page bill and think they understand everything about it. But we made things so complex that only a certain class or a group of people can understand it because they wrote it, and all we get is cliff notes or just last minute information out there that distorts us with memes and everything else. And I think that we've divided ourselves because individual education doesn't matter anymore. We're a ecosystem of groupthink, right? So we can't get individuals to read and write and see things and be critical when we're all saying the same things from our little corners. And I stay in the middle of everything saying, hey, I feel myself as a person that's going, hey, stop, let's think, let's talk. Because with the media, I said earlier, misinformation or disinformation, we don't know what the truth is. And then if our written work is very similar to our social media and our actual, television media, how do we know what the truth is if we're not even reading? So we have a lot more to go. And honestly, to tell you, I cannot even answer that question in the time frame we have or with the knowledge I have currently. It's just we have a lot of things to take a look at, and there's so many different aspects of what should we look at differently. But as far as the political side, it's just we don't know who's pulling those strings from those politicians, and we don't know who is actually really an ally of our country these days. We don't know right now. So right now we're just we're getting the misinformation, disinformation from all sources, and we don't have any real source to actually call ourselves right or wrong, correct or incorrect at this point.
So my final question then is a personal one. Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years, especially in regard to this educating and you know making people more literate?
I see myself teaching, probably adjunct. I don't really want a major position at a school, just adjunct professor and guest lecturing all over on the AI literacy, all literacy in general, and also see myself as with a nonprofit organization that puts information in literacy, and from financial literacy to AI literacy to social literacy. There's different things where our country need, our communities need, and I think that with that coalition of people to come together to think and critical think, have a critical thinking society, that we actually put it out there so we can help people see things beyond the fog. I think that's what we're doing. I consider myself doing the first of my life.
Well, I will link to the article we've been discussing that's on your website, marcusdtaylor.me, not com.me. So thank you for spending almost an hour and a half speaking with me, Marcus. Well, MD.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I wish people go out there and read more, understand more, ask questions, be critical, so we can actually have a good conversation rather than drawing our corners and coming out with knives.